rancher turned down every woman, until an Apache widow asked, "You want a wife or just shelter?" John Miller had always been a man of quiet strength. His life on the Arizona ranch was simple, yet demanding. But every morning before the sun peeked over the horizon, he would saddle his horse, Shadow, and ride through the dew-soaked pastures. He checked on the cattle, ensuring the young calves were safe and the fences were intact. But the work was exhausting, but John welcomed it. It gave him purpose and kept his mind steady, even when memories of the past sometimes crept in. Desperate, years ago, John had been married. His wife, Mary, had been a bright light in his life, full of laughter and warmth. Britt. She had a way of making the ranch feel like a home, rather than just a piece of land with buildings and fences. But life had been cruelly short with her, Britt. A sudden illness took her away, leaving John with a heavy heart and 2 young children to raise. The grief had been deep, but it had also shaped him, Britt. He learned to be patient, resilient, and determined, qualities that served him well on the ranch. His children, Emily and James, became his world. Britt. Their laughter, curiosity, and small achievements were enough to fill the empty spaces in his heart, at least for a while. As the years passed, John's ranch grew. Britt. He expanded the pastures, repaired the old barns, and even planted a small orchard near the creek. Life was not easy, but he loved it. Britt. He loved the smell of the fresh earth after rain, the sight of the sun dipping below the mountains, and the way the wind whispered through the tall grasses. His neighbors often admired his hard work, though they also wondered about the man who had remained so solitary for so long. Britt. Despite his success and kindness, John had a reputation in the surrounding towns. Many women had heard of him, a strong, dependable man with land and a good heart. But over the years, countless women had expressed their interest in becoming part of his life. Some came with hope, others with ambition, but John had turned every one of them down. Britt. He did not want to rush love or let appearances guide his heart. He wanted something real, something deep and meaningful. Britt. And so he stayed alone. The townspeople whispered about him. Britt. He's too proud, some said. He's afraid of love, others murmured. Britt. But the truth was simpler. John simply valued trust and honesty more than anything else. He had learned that people could pretend to care for wealth or status, but true companionship was rare and precious. Britt. The thought of marrying someone for convenience or appearances made him uneasy. So he kept his doors closed, not out of arrogance, but out of a quiet principle that had guided him for years. Britt. Still, solitude had its challenges. Even a man as strong and capable as John could feel the pangs of loneliness. Britt. On cold winter nights he would sit by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, and think about what life might have been like if Mary had lived. Sometimes he missed the sound of someone speaking his name with affection, the warmth of a hand in his own. Britt. But he never let these thoughts weaken him. Instead, he poured his energy into his children and the ranch. Britt. Emily and James were growing quickly, and he wanted to give them everything he could. Their happiness became his mission, and in a way it filled the emptiness that lingered in his heart. Britt. John's life was also defined by routine, which he embraced with discipline. Every task on the ranch had its time. Mornings were for the animals and the fields, afternoons for repairs and planning, evenings for the quiet moments with his children. He took pride in the land he had built with his own hands. But the barns, fences, and pastures were not just structures. They were symbols of endurance, patience, and care. Britt. Each day brought new challenges, from sick cattle to broken tools, but John met them with calm determination. Nothing on the ranch could surprise him anymore, yet the work never became boring. Britt. Each day had its rhythm, its purpose. Even with this busy life, John remained aware of the outside world. He kept in touch with neighbors, helped those in need, and sometimes joined town meetings to discuss local matters. But he never let social pressures dictate his decisions.
Brit. Marriage proposals, invitations, and social calls came often, but John politely declined them all. Some women were persistent, visiting the ranch or sending letters, but he answered with honesty and respect.
He knew his decision puzzled many, but he also knew it was the right choice for him and his children. Despite all this, John had an inner yearning he rarely admitted, even to himself. He longed for someone who could understand the quiet rhythm of his life, someone who valued the land and the work as much as he did. He dreamed of a companion who could share in the simple joys, tending the garden, caring for the animals, walking along the dusty trails as the sun set. But he also knew that such a person was rare, and he refused to settle for anything less than genuine connection. Until that day came, he was content to live alone, surrounded by the things he loved most: his children, the ranch, and the beauty of the untamed land. One crisp morning, as John rode across the eastern pasture, he noticed the first signs of spring. Small wildflowers had begun to bloom along the fence line, and the creek, swollen with winter rain, gurgled cheerfully over smooth stones. Desperation, feeling the wind against his face, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine the life he might one day share with someone who truly understood him. But then he shook his head and focused on his work, knowing that day was still far off. For now, the ranch needed him, and he needed the ranch. Emily and James often joined him on his rounds. Emily, with her curious eyes and gentle smile, loved to watch her father check the fences, while James, ever energetic, tried to help even when his small hands weren't strong enough. John took pride in their enthusiasm, guiding them with patience. One day this land will be yours, he told them often, and you'll understand the care it needs. The children's laughter echoed across the fields, a sound that brought warmth to John's heart, reminding him that he was never truly alone. Evenings were quieter. After the children went to bed, John would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The wind rustled through the trees, the animals huddled in the barns, and the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky. These moments of solitude were comforting rather than lonely. John reflected on the day's work, the small victories and challenges, and allowed himself a quiet sense of pride.
Life was not easy, but it was honest, and that honesty mattered more than anything else.
Though he had turned down many opportunities for companionship, John remained open in his heart. He believed in the possibility of true love, even if it seemed unlikely. He did not fear being alone. He feared living a life without integrity, without trust, without connection. And so, he continued, day by day, following the rhythm of the ranch, caring for his children and maintaining the life he had built. Little did he know that his patience, his steadfast heart, and his unwavering principles were about to meet someone who would change everything he had ever believed about love, trust, and partnership. The ranch, with its sprawling fields and sturdy buildings, stood as a testament to John's resilience. The land had known his hands, his sweat, and his dedication. And though John remained alone in terms of companionship, the ranch was never empty. It held the memories of the past, the life of the present, and the promise of the future. Each sunrise brought hope, each sunset brought reflection, and each day carried the quiet assurance that life, in its own way, was preparing John for something extraordinary, something he had not yet imagined. The small towns surrounding John Miller's ranch were lively places, full of people who knew one another and shared stories about neighbors, ranchers, and travelers. In these towns, John's reputation had grown over the years. He was known not just as a hard-working rancher, but as a man of principle, a man who did not rush into decisions, and who valued honesty above all. Stories circulated about his strength, his quiet nature, and the many women he had politely turned down. Some found his steadfastness admirable. Others thought him stubborn or too proud. But John never concerned himself with gossip.
He had learned long ago that opinions were easy to form but difficult to understand fully. Despite the rumors, life in John's world moved steadily.
His ranch required constant attention, and he remained deeply involved in its upkeep. The animals needed feeding, the fields needed care, and the fences required constant maintenance. Winter storms sometimes brought damage that had to be repaired immediately, while spring rains demanded the planting of new crops. Even as he worked, John's mind often wandered to the stories he had heard in town. Women would ask about him, offer themselves, or make subtle suggestions about marriage. He appreciated their interest, but it never stirred the feelings he sought in a companion. He wanted someone who understood his life and shared his values, someone who would be more than a guest in his home or a visitor on his land. As he worked, John often thought about his own family and the way he had raised his children. Emily and James were growing quickly, and their curiosity about the world often kept him on his toes. Emily loved books and stories, always asking questions about faraway places and history, while James was energetic and adventurous, often imagining himself a cowboy or explorer. John took pride in nurturing their interests, encouraging Emily to read and learn, and guiding James in handling animals and understanding the land. Raising children alone had taught him patience and perseverance. He understood the importance of listening, of guiding rather than forcing, and of allowing his children to grow at their own pace. Social expectations, however, were a constant presence in the background. The townspeople often spoke of marriage as if it were a requirement for happiness, especially for someone of John's status and success. "A man like John shouldn't be alone," neighbors would say. "He has a fine ranch, strong hands, and a good heart. Any woman would be lucky to marry him." Yet John did not believe in rushing into marriage for appearances. He respected the intentions of those who approached him, but he had seen too many unions formed out of convenience or pressure to want anything less than genuine connection. The whispers and suggestions did not sway him. His focus remained on his family and his work. Some women tried more than gentle conversation. They sent letters, gifts, or even came directly to the ranch, hoping to convince John of their sincerity. Each attempt was met with polite rejection. John valued honesty, and he refused to accept anything less. He was careful not to hurt anyone unnecessarily, but he also refused to compromise his principles. In his eyes, life was too short to waste on relationships built on appearances rather than understanding and respect. This steadfastness became part of his identity, a quiet strength that others respected even if they did not fully understand it. As the seasons changed, John noticed how different people approached life. Some were patient and thoughtful, while others were impulsive or self-serving.
Observing these behaviors reinforced his belief that true companionship was rare and valuable. He also noticed that people often judged him for his solitude, assuming it was a sign of pride or fear.
In reality, John was simply waiting for someone whose heart matched his own. He did not want to settle, and he did not want to let loneliness cloud his judgment. This careful approach guided him through difficult choices and helped him maintain the integrity he valued so highly. On the ranch, daily life was not just work. It was also reflection and learning. Disparity. John found joy in observing nature and the passage of time. He watched the birds build nests along the fence line, listened to the wind rustling through the trees, and studied the stars at night. These quiet moments reminded him of the importance of patience and awareness. He knew that life was not meant to be rushed, and he found contentment in understanding the rhythm of the world around him. The land itself was a teacher, and he learned from its cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. John's relationship with his neighbors was built on mutual respect. He helped when needed, offering tools, advice, or labor for communal projects. In turn, neighbors shared news, stories, and updates about life in the nearby towns. But this network of connection kept John grounded, even as he maintained a sense of independence. He valued these relationships but always prioritized his family and his ranch. But he knew that balance was essential. Community support was helpful, but true fulfillment came from his own efforts and the life he created with his children. Even with these connections, John's solitude remained noticeable. The children often asked why their father did not have a companion, and he explained carefully in ways they could understand. "Sometimes it takes time to find someone who truly understands you," he told them.
I want someone who will be a friend, a partner, and a guide, not just a visitor in our lives. That is worth waiting for.
Emily and James accepted his words, though they sometimes expressed curiosity about what a mother figure might be like. John never dismissed their questions, but used them to teach lessons about patience, respect, and the value of meaningful relationships.
The passing years did not weaken John's principles. They strengthened them.
He saw many marriages in the towns around him, some happy, some troubled.
These observations reinforced his belief that rushing into a relationship could lead to disappointment and unhappiness. He wanted something lasting, something based on trust and mutual understanding. Desperate, his refusal to compromise became part of his legend in the local communities. The rancher who turned down every woman, not out of pride but out of a desire for genuine connection. Even as he maintained this cautious approach, John's heart remained open for despair. He believed in the possibility of love and companionship, even if it seemed distant or unlikely.
He took pleasure in small signs of kindness from others, in the laughter of his children, and in the beauty of the land he tended. A part of time.
He knew that true connection required time, effort, and understanding. Until that connection appeared, he was content to live his life with integrity, focusing on the work, the family, and the rhythms of the ranch that he loved so dearly. But one spring morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, John reflected on how much his life had changed since the loss of his wife. The children were growing into capable and curious young people. The ranch was thriving, and he had developed a deep appreciation for patience and resilience. Yet a quiet longing remained, a hope that someday he might meet someone whose heart matched his own. He did not know when that day would come, but he felt certain it would, because life often had a way of surprising even the most cautious hearts. As he walked through the pastures, checking fences and observing the cattle, John felt a sense of peace. The years had taught him much about responsibility, love, and the importance of choosing wisely. He understood the value of solitude and the power of patience. And though the townspeople might never fully understand why he remained unmarried, John knew that he was living according to his principles, and that was enough. Little did John know that the careful, patient life he had built, the life of work, family, and quiet reflection, was preparing him for something extraordinary. Someone was about to enter his world, someone whose courage, honesty, and strength would challenge everything he thought he knew about love and partnership. And when that day arrived, John would discover that the life he had so carefully protected was ready to expand in ways he had never imagined, blending past loss with the promise of new beginnings. Until then, he continued his work, tending to the ranch, nurturing his children, and honoring the life he had created. The land flourished under his care, the children thrived under his guidance, and John's heart remained open to possibilities, no matter how distant they seemed. The foundation was set, the life prepared, and the stage quietly waiting for the story that was about to unfold. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the western hills, John Miller was riding along the edge of his eastern pasture, inspecting the fence line where a recent storm had left a few posts leaning. The air was warm but carried the faint chill of approaching evening. He had just tightened a loose wire when he noticed movement along the distant trail. At first, He thought it might be a traveler passing by, which was not unusual, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman, riding alone, with a calm and confident presence that immediately caught his attention. But she was not dressed like the women from the nearby towns who had come seeking his attention in the past. Her clothing was practical, suited for travel and work rather than social gatherings. But her dark hair, pulled back from her face, highlighted sharp, thoughtful eyes that seemed to observe everything around her with careful intelligence. There was a quiet strength about her, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. John felt a mixture of curiosity and caution as he guided Shadow closer. The woman slowed her horse as she reached the fence line, keeping her distance at first. "You John Miller?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "Yes," John replied, nodding cautiously.
And you are?
My name is Morningstar, she said. There was no flourish, no attempt to impress.
"I need a place to rest. A night or two, maybe." "I am traveling alone." John studied her for a moment, noticing the determination in her eyes, the confidence in the way she held herself. He had seen travelers before, but something about this woman was different. She seemed unafraid of him, unafraid of the distance between them, unafraid of the quiet power he carried. "You can stay in the guest cabin," he said finally. "It is small, but it is safe."
There is water, and the fire is ready. Morningstar's gaze met his, steady and unwavering.
Then she asked a question that took John by surprise. "You want a wife, or just shelter?" The words were not cruel nor playful. They were direct, almost like a challenge. John blinked, unsure how to respond at first. He had never encountered someone who spoke with such honesty and clarity. Most of the women who had come to the ranch tried to charm him, flatter him, or coax him with gentle words. Morningstar offered none of that. She demanded truth. He began, but stopped. He realized that the truth was complicated. "I do not know," he said finally. "I am cautious." "I do not marry lightly." Morningstar nodded, as if she expected no less.
Good. Then you will be honest with me, and I will be honest with you.
That is all I ask." Something about her directness resonated with John. He had spent years avoiding false intentions, protecting himself and his children from disappointment. Here was someone who understood that principle without needing to be taught. Desperate.
He gestured toward the cabin. Then, come.
You will have food and shelter for as long as you need. No more, no less.
Morningstar dismounted, guiding her horse carefully. Her movements were deliberate and confident, yet she showed respect for the animals and the land around her. John noticed the care she took with the horse, the gentle way she checked its bridle and hooves. It was clear she was used to work, accustomed to living with purpose and responsibility. Over the next few days, Morningstar settled into the guest cabin, helping with chores as she could. She fetched water from the well, fed the animals, and even assisted in mending fences. John observed her silently at first, noting her skill, her quiet diligence, and her natural understanding of ranch life. She worked not because she had to, but because she chose to, and that choice impressed him deeply. Their conversations were short at first, cautious and respectful. Morningstar asked about the land, about the animals, about the routines of ranch life. John answered honestly without embellishment and found himself intrigued by the way she listened, not merely hearing but understanding. Her questions were practical yet insightful, revealing a mind that thought deeply and a heart that cared genuinely. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the pastures, Morningstar asked about his life. Desperate.
You live here alone, with your children. Why? John paused, considering how much to share.
He could have spoken about the loss of his wife, about the challenges of raising Emily and James alone, about the caution that had shaped him for years, but instead he spoke simply. I value honesty. I value trust. Many come with good intentions, but some come with other motives. I cannot allow my heart to be taken lightly. I have responsibilities. My children are my first concern. The ranch is my work, my life. That is why I have remained alone. Morningstar nodded, her eyes thoughtful. It is rare to find a man who understands the weight of responsibility and still lives with integrity. Most choose convenience. You do not.
Her words struck John. Few people had ever recognized the careful balance he maintained between duty and desire.
He felt an unusual warmth, a sense of connection that he had not felt in years. It was not romantic, not yet, but it was significant. Morningstar's recognition of his principles was like a mirror reflecting the values he held most dear. Days turned into a week, and their trust began to grow. Morningstar was not intrusive. She respected boundaries, yet she became a part of the rhythm of the ranch. She rode with him to check distant fences, helped with feeding and tending the animals, and shared meals with the children. Emily and James warmed quickly to her presence. They sensed her kindness and strength, and they were drawn to her stories and gentle guidance. John observed this silently, noting the subtle way Morningstar fit into their lives without demanding anything. One morning, as John repaired a section of fence near the creek, Morningstar approached him with a basket of freshly picked herbs. She handed it to him with a small, knowing smile. These will help with the cattle if they get minor scrapes or bites, she said. Nature has a way of giving what we need if we pay attention. John took the basket, impressed not only by her knowledge but by her thoughtfulness. He realized that this woman, who had appeared suddenly on his land, was not seeking advantage or favor. She was here because she chose to be, because she had a purpose, and because she respected the life he had built. As the days passed, their conversations became deeper, moving from practical matters to reflections on life, loss, and resilience. Morningstar shared stories of her past, of the challenges she had faced as a widow, and the ways she had learned to survive and persevere. John, in turn, spoke of his own experiences, the joys and sorrows of raising children alone, the hard work of keeping a ranch alive, and the principles that guided him. In these exchanges, a bond began to form, quiet yet unmistakable. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Morningstar spoke again of her initial question. You want a wife, or just shelter? John looked at her, the words resonating differently now than they had when first spoken. He realized that he no longer saw her merely as a traveler needing a place to stay. Her presence had awakened something long dormant within him. A recognition that life could be shared, that trust could be mutual, and that companionship could be built on honesty and respect. I want honesty, he said softly. I want partnership. And I am beginning to think that might be possible with you. Morningstar's eyes softened, and she nodded. Then we begin slowly. We see what life can teach us together. There is no rush, only understanding. It was a beginning, fragile yet promising. John knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges, but for the first time in many years, he felt a spark of hope. He had found someone who understood the value of integrity, who shared his respect for life's responsibilities, and who offered her presence not for gain, but for connection. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, began to feel different. The presence of Morningstar brought a new energy, a sense of anticipation, and the quiet joy of shared purpose. John felt a subtle shift in his heart, a recognition that life could surprise even those who had waited patiently. The work continued, the routines remained, but now there was an undercurrent of possibility, a sense that something extraordinary was unfolding quietly amidst the pastures, fences, and open skies of his ranch. And so, as the stars appeared above and the night settled over the land, John and Morningstar shared a simple meal on the porch. They spoke of nothing and everything, of the day's work and the beauty of the land around them. In the quiet moments, a connection deepened. A connection based on honesty, respect, and the willingness to see each other clearly. For John, the solitary rancher, this was a turning point. The woman who had asked a simple direct question had opened a door he had long kept closed. And as the night wrapped the ranch in its calm embrace, he felt, for the first time in many years, that perhaps his life was ready to change in ways he had never imagined. Breathless melantension. The days that followed Morningstar's arrival brought a subtle transformation to John Miller's ranch. The routines of work continued, as they always had, but there was now a quiet warmth that filled the spaces between the barns, the pastures, and the small cabin that Morningstar occupied. John noticed it first in small ways. The sound of laughter from Emily as she shared a story with Morningstar, the careful attention Morningstar gave to the animals, and the way she seemed to understand the rhythm of the ranch without needing much explanation. One morning, as the first rays of sun painted the horizon in soft gold, John found Morningstar already at work near the chicken coop. She was repairing the broken fence with steady hands, humming quietly to herself. Emily and James were nearby, helping in small ways, carrying tools or collecting eggs. John watched them from the barn doorway, leaning against the frame, and felt a strange but pleasant feeling. It was a sense of completeness, subtle yet undeniable, that had not existed before. The ranch, his home, and his family felt different, more alive, more whole. "Good morning," John called, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Morningstar looked up, smiled, and wiped her hands on a cloth.
Good morning. I thought I'd start early before it got too hot.
John nodded, impressed.
You do know your way around a ranch. She shrugged slightly, modestly. I have lived and worked on land most of my life. One learns quickly what is needed to survive and thrive.
Her words struck John, not only because they were true, but because they revealed a depth of experience and resilience he had rarely encountered in others.
Most of the women who had tried to court him lacked knowledge of hard work, preferring comfort and leisure over the daily demands of ranch life. Morningstar was different, but she understood toil, responsibility, and purpose, not as burdens but as natural parts of living fully. As the day progressed, John found himself assigning her small tasks that required precision and care. She repaired a section of the barn roof, tended the garden, and even helped with feeding the younger calves, showing a patience and gentleness that impressed John.
Yet she was not timid. She approached challenges with confidence, asking questions when needed but never relying on anyone else to make decisions for her.
John realized that her presence was teaching him something he had long forgotten, that partnership was not just about shared space, but shared effort, mutual respect, and understanding. Their conversations also grew deeper. One afternoon, as they sat by the creek after fixing a section of fence, Morningstar spoke of her past. "I was married once," she said quietly, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. "My husband, he died. I have traveled since, but I have learned that life is best lived with purpose, not fear." Desperate, And I have learned to recognize honesty when I see it. John listened, his heart tightening slightly at the reminder of loss. Not his own, but the loss she had endured.
Brit, you have been through much, he said softly. And yet you carry yourself with strength.
Brit, that is rare. But
Faintly, she smiled faintly, but it was not a smile of pride.
strength is learned. Brit, it is not given. I have had no choice but to learn it.
Brit, and I admire the same in others. I see it in you, John Miller.
That is why I asked my question when I arrived. I needed to know if your heart is guided by truth or by convenience. Brit. John felt a warmth spread through him, a recognition that someone had truly seen him. Not just the rancher, not just the father, but the man himself. Brit beat. He had spent years shielding his heart from false intentions, and here was someone who understood the value of patience, honesty, and respect. It was an awakening, subtle but profound, that made him realize how lonely he had been, not just for companionship, but for understanding. Brit.
Over the next weeks, their partnership deepened through shared work. They repaired fences, cleared overgrown paths, and tended to the fields together.
Brit. Morningstar had ideas for improving the efficiency of the ranch, suggesting new ways to feed the livestock or rotate the pastures. John was initially hesitant. He had managed the ranch alone for years and was used to doing things his way. Brit. But as he listened and watched her work, he began to realize that her insights were valuable. He respected her mind, her skill, and her courage to speak honestly, even when it challenged his own long-held methods. Brit. Emily and James thrived in this environment. They learned new skills from Morningstar, who encouraged them to observe, think, and act carefully. Brit. Emily, always curious, asked questions about plants and animals, while James eagerly followed her instructions in tending to the young calves. John watched, quietly proud, as his children developed a new confidence and understanding, guided by someone who cared for them as much as he did. Morningstar's presence was not just a help, it was a gift, one that enriched the lives of everyone on the ranch. Evenings became a time of reflection and conversation. Breath. After long days of work, John and Morningstar would sit on the porch, sipping water or herbal tea, talking about life, dreams, and hopes. These moments were not rushed, they were quiet and patient, filled with listening, understanding, and the subtle recognition of shared values. Brit. Morningstar's presence had introduced a rhythm that balanced work with thought, effort with reflection, and duty with joy. John felt a sense of peace he had not known for years. Brit. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Morningstar spoke of the future. You have built something strong here, John. Brit. The ranch, your children, your life. But strength is not just in what we build. It is in how we share it. Brit. Partnership makes even the hardest work lighter, even the loneliest days warmer. John looked at her, recognizing the truth in her words. Brit. For so long he had carried the weight of his responsibilities alone, believing that sharing would dilute his control or compromise his principles. But now he saw that sharing did not weaken him. It strengthened the life he had built. Brit. Morningstar had shown him that companionship, when grounded in honesty and respect, could bring joy and resilience rather than distraction or trouble. As weeks became months, their trust grew. Brit. They no longer needed to speak every thought aloud. A glance, a gesture, or a shared understanding of a task conveyed meaning. Morningstar's laughter became a familiar and comforting sound on the ranch, blending with the calls of the animals and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Brit. John found himself smiling more easily, taking satisfaction not just in the completion of tasks, but in the shared effort, the mutual respect, and the quiet joy of companionship. One day, After a long morning of moving cattle to fresh pastures, John and Morningstar sat on a fallen log, exhausted but content. Emily and James played nearby, chasing one another through the tall grasses.
Psst. Morning Star turned to John and said, I think the children have accepted me. That is no small thing.
Brit.
They feel your heart and they know I mean no harm. That is the start of a family in a way.
Brit. John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The ranch was no longer just a home for work and survival. It was becoming a home for trust, understanding, and the quiet beginnings of love. Brit. He realized that Morningstar had not just entered his life. She had transformed it. She had brought insight, partnership, and the possibility of companionship he had long thought impossible. Brit. Evenings continued with shared meals and quiet conversation, sometimes punctuated by the laughter of Emily and James. John felt a subtle shift in his heart, an awakening to feelings he had long kept buried. Brit. He was no longer simply cautious or protective. He was beginning to hope, to imagine, and to trust in the possibility of a future shared with someone who truly understood him. Through all this, Morningstar never demanded, never pressured. Brit. She worked alongside him, guided the children, and shared her knowledge. Yet she allowed space for John to observe, think, and decide. Her presence was gentle but powerful, a balance of independence and connection that made him feel safe and respected. Brit. By the time spring fully arrived, with flowers blooming and the ranch buzzing with life, John realized that his solitude was no longer a necessity. Morningstar had become a part of the rhythm of his life, not as a guest, but as a partner. Brit. They shared the responsibilities of the ranch, the joys of the children, and the quiet moments of reflection. Each day their bond grew stronger, founded on honesty, respect, and shared purpose. Brit. And so, as the sun set behind the western hills, casting a warm glow across the pastures, John understood something profound. Life was not just about survival, work, or protecting one's heart. Brit. It was about partnership, trust, and the courage to open oneself to another. Morningstar had arrived unexpectedly, but she had brought clarity, joy, and companionship that he had long thought impossible. Brit. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home of shared effort, quiet laughter, and the subtle beginnings of love. Time. For John Miller, the solitary rancher, part 4 of his life had begun. A chapter defined not just by work and responsibility, but by trust, partnership, and the hope of a future lived together, side by side, in understanding and respect.
Rotation. As summer arrived, the Arizona sun bathed John Miller's ranch in warm golden light. The days were long, the pastures vibrant with green, and the air filled with the sounds of birds, animals, and the wind rustling through the grasses.
But for John, life had changed in ways he could scarcely have imagined just months before. Morningstar had become more than a companion. She had become an essential part of his world. She worked alongside him, guided his children with care, and brought an energy and understanding that transformed the ranch into a home filled with warmth and purpose. The transformation began subtly. Tasks that had once felt like laborious routines now carried a sense of shared achievement. Mornings were spent tending the cattle together, each move synchronized by experience and trust. Protection. Afternoon chores became opportunities for collaboration, repairing fences, clearing brush, or tending to the small orchard by the creek.
Even the children's laughter took on a new meaning.
Why? Emily and James were happier, more confident, and filled with a quiet pride in the work they could accomplish alongside Morningstar. John observed them often, noting the comfort and joy that had entered their lives.
One evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, John and Morningstar sat on the porch, watching the shadows stretch across the fields. The children had gone inside for the night, leaving the ranch quiet except for the occasional call of a distant bird or the lowing of a cow. For the first time in years, John allowed himself to feel fully at peace. He glanced at Morningstar, noticing the gentle way she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "John," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "We have come a long way together, haven't we, Britt?"
We have. I never expected this.
Britt, I never thought I would find someone who fits into my life so naturally, who understands it, and who shares the same values. Britt.
I did not expect it either. Life has a way of surprising us when we are patient and open.
Britt. And I see in you the same strength, honesty, and care that I value. That is why I stayed, why I chose to be here. Britt. John felt a warmth spread through him, stronger than any he had felt in years. The quiet companionship of the past weeks had blossomed into a bond he could not ignore. Britt. It was not merely friendship, it was respect, trust, and the early stirrings of love. The thought of sharing his life fully with Morningstar no longer seemed impossible. It felt natural, even necessary. Breath.
The next morning, John decided to take a long ride with Morningstar. They followed the trail through the hills beyond the ranch, the children waving goodbye from the porch.
Britt. The ride was leisurely, filled with conversation about the land, the animals, and the small improvements they could make together. John noticed the way Morningstar's presence brought out his own happiness, a lightness he had not felt in years. Britt. He also noticed how naturally she had integrated into his life, how seamlessly her care and wisdom had become part of the ranch's rhythm. At the top of a hill overlooking the ranch, they stopped to rest. Britt, the view was breathtaking. The fields stretching below them, the creek winding like silver through the land, and the mountains in the distance glowing in the morning sun.
John turned to Morningstar, his heart full of words he had long kept buried.
Britt.
I have thought a great deal about you, about us, about this life we are building together, he said. And I realize now that I do not want to imagine my days without you.
Britt. You have become part of everything, my family, my work, my home. I want this partnership to last in every sense of the word. But I want you to stay, not just as a friend or helper, but as someone I trust with my life, my heart, and my family. Morningstar's eyes softened, and she reached for his hand.
I have already chosen, John. I see what you value, how you care for your children, your land, and your principles.
Britt. And I choose to share my life with you. Slowly, carefully, and honestly. I choose this life by your side, Britt. It was a moment of quiet affirmation, simple, yet profound. There was no need for grand gestures or hurried promises. Britt. Their bond had been built on patience, respect, and shared purpose, and now it was blossoming into a partnership that promised longevity and happiness. John felt a sense of gratitude he could hardly express. Britt. He had spent years waiting, observing, and protecting his heart, and now life had delivered someone who matched him in strength, wisdom, and honesty. Returning to the ranch, John and Morningstar continued to build their shared life with dedication and care. Britt.
Morningstar brought new ideas for improving the ranch, such as creating a small garden to provide fresh vegetables and herbs, or organizing the barn more efficiently. John welcomed her suggestions, valuing her perspective and the way she respected the land as much as he did.
The children thrived under this environment, learning not just the practical skills of ranch life, but also the values of cooperation, empathy, and integrity. Over time, the ranch felt transformed. Britt. The buildings, fields, and fences were the same, but the atmosphere had changed completely. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of warmth that had been absent for years. Britt. John noticed how much lighter his days felt, how he could focus not only on work, but also on the joy of sharing life with someone who truly understood him. Britt. The presence of Morningstar had shifted the balance of his life, blending responsibility with companionship, solitude with shared joy. desperate. One evening after a long day of work, John and Morningstar sat by the fire outside the cabin, Emily and James nearby, drawing and reading by lantern light. The fire crackled softly, and the stars twinkled above. John took Morningstar's hand, looking into her eyes with quiet certainty. Britt, we have built something extraordinary here, he said. Not just the ranch, not just a home, but a life filled with understanding, trust, and love.
Sprit. I never imagined I would feel this way again. Morningstar squeezed his hand gently.
Britt, it is the life we choose, John. Together, Britt. Slowly, patiently, honestly. That is the strongest foundation there is. And I am grateful for it every day. As weeks passed, John and Morningstar's relationship grew even stronger. They shared not only the work of the ranch, but also the small joys of everyday life. Watching the sunrise together, preparing meals, teaching Emily and James new skills, and tending the animals with care. Britt. Each day brought opportunities to strengthen their bond, to learn from each other, and to appreciate the depth of their connection. John noticed that he was no longer the solitary rancher who had once turned away every woman. Britt. His heart had opened, not hastily or blindly, but with thoughtfulness and trust. Morningstar had entered his life in a way that honored both his principles and his heart. Britt. He realized that love was not about rushing or forcing, but about patience, respect, and the courage to allow someone into the quiet spaces of life. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a fence along the western boundary of the ranch, Britt. I think we are ready, she said softly. Ready to acknowledge what is already here. Britt. Ready to commit fully, not just to each other, but to the life we are building together. John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Yes, he said. Britt. We have built trust, understanding, and respect. And now I want to take the next step. Not out of necessity, but out of desire. And because my heart tells me this is right. Britt. The children, Emily and James, were equally accepting of this new chapter. Britt. They had come to love Morningstar as part of their family, appreciating her guidance, warmth, and the shared laughter that now filled the ranch. John realized that the family he had once thought complete with just himself and his children was now whole in a new, deeper way. The bond they shared was strong, built on mutual care, trust, and shared experiences. And so, in the golden light of a late summer evening, John and Morningstar began the next chapter of their lives together. Britt. There was no ceremony needed in the immediate moment. Their commitment was evident in every action, every shared task, and every word of respect and honesty. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a place of trust, love, and partnership. Britt. In the months that followed, their life together continued to flourish. They faced challenges, as any family does, but they met each one together, drawing strength from their shared values and mutual respect. Desperate. The ranch prospered under their combined care, the children grew in confidence and skill, and the home was filled with laughter, learning, and warmth. Britt. John realized that the patience he had exercised all those years, refusing unsuitable companionship, valuing honesty, and protecting his family, had prepared him for a love that was genuine and deeply fulfilling. Britt. By the end of the first year with Morningstar fully part of his life, John understood something he had not fully grasped before. That true partnership was not simply about companionship, but about shared effort, trust, and the courage to build a life together. Morningstar had entered his world at the right moment, challenging him, inspiring him, and ultimately completing a life that had once been defined by solitude. And so, the ranch, the children, and the quiet man who had once turned away every woman became something new. Britt. Life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful. Britt. John and Morningstar had built more than a partnership. They had built a home, a family, and a shared life grounded in respect, honesty, and love. The sun continued to rise and set over the fields. The wind whispered through the grasses, and the stars shone above the ranch. Now a place of enduring joy, trust, and the promise of many more years shared together.